Hello, everybody. Welcome to our permitting part 2 class. My co-host Mercy is this is part 2 of our permitting process series, where last week we discussed the new model permit, and this week we'll actually be going through the steps of the permitting process. So our agenda for today, start with a little introduction about permitting. Then we will go into the permitting process steps. We'll talk about the new permitting process decision tree. We will also go over BFE determinations as well. We'll go over helpful tips and resources and some key takeaways. My computer will cooperate, that is. There you go. Okay, so an introduction. Communities manage development in the Special Flood Hazard Area, the SFHA, as a condition of NFIP participation through an agreement. Development is managed in accordance with the local floodplain management ordinance. Any development in the SFHA must have written permission, the permit, prior to the start of construction. Just a little key term there. Federal government makes flood insurance available within communities that adopt and enforce floodplain management regulations to reduce flood risk to new floodplain development. Yeah, this is the big reason why permitting is needed, as it keeps you eligible to participate in the NFIP. The development is just any man-made change to improved or unimproved real estate, including but not limited to buildings or other structures, mining, dredging, filling, grading, paving, excavation, or drilling operations, or storage of equipment or materials. So it covers absolutely anything, any man-made changes to the environment, whether it's putting in signs, buildings, like it said, making sidewalks, trails, everything possible that somebody is doing to change the floodplain. So why is this process necessary? As I said, it is a requirement of the National Flood Insurance Program participation. It's also in federal and state law, the Code of Federal Regulations, and the Nebraska Administrative Code. It also improves community resiliency by ensuring structures are built in compliance with local floodplain management regulations. If you're following the point of these regulations that you are abiding to is to make sure your community is better equipped in cases of flooding events. That's why it's really important to make sure that all of these developments and changes are being permitted properly. One of the last reasons that the process is necessary is that our office, DWE, as some people call it, or the Nebraska Floodplain Management Division, or FEMA, will ask for these documents during a community assistance contact, or CAC, or a community assistant visit, a CAV. So that's also important to keep those on file so that you can prove to us, if we ever come to you or if FEMA ever comes to you, that you are in fact keeping track of your floodplain management. Also, unpermitted development within your community's SFHA is considered a violation. So unresolved violations can jeopardize the community's standing with the NFIP. Probation or suspension from the program could occur if no efforts are made to resolve the issue. So probation, it's a period that lasts at least until all program deficiencies have been corrected and violations have been remedied to the maximum extent possible. And it can be extended for up to 1 year after that. Probation has no effect on the continued availability of flood insurance. However, an additional charge of $50 will be added to the premium for each policy for a period of at least 1 year. That's when you're in probation. Suspension can also happen if you're failing to enforce your floodplain management regulations. If your community is suspended, new flood insurance coverage can't be purchased and policies can't be renewed in a suspended community. In addition, 3-year policies become void at the end of the current policy year with a prorated refund given for any remaining years of the original 3-year policy term. FEMA disaster assistance is unavailable and suspension remains until all violations are resolved. So we're trying to avoid that at all. We really do not like having communities either suspended or on probation. So making sure that you are permitting your development is super, super important. So now to get into the actual permitting process. So this is just a general overview. of the permitting process. Step 1, there's a project proposal. Step 2, the floodplain development permit application, and pay attention to that word application. This is not just giving the permit and signing off on this development. This is when the applicant, you give them the application, they will give you the information on what the project proposal is. Step 3 is when you as the floodplain administrator will review the application. Step 4, the floodplain administrator will make a decision on the permit, whether they're approving, denying, or requesting more information. Step 5 is project monitoring, which, in case you didn't know, the permitting process does not end when the permit is signed off. You also must continue to monitor the project, make sure they are following your permit. And step 6 is when you get the post-construction proof of compliance to make sure that everything followed the permit correctly. We're going to dive deeper into all that. Step 1, the project proposal. So someone within your community, within your jurisdiction, comes in and has a project that they would like to do, something yes, a development, something that will make a man-made change. So the floodplain administrator will check the proposed location to see if it's in the floodplain. This should be using the official FEMA firm panels or our interactive map online, which just shows the firm boundaries, the firm floodplain boundaries on a digital interface. So communities should ensure they have easily discoverable contact information for the local floodplain administrator. You don't want people to just be missing getting their permits just because they couldn't find the information. So you want that to be very readily available. And also, if you have other offices within your community that also receive or renew permit applications for any kind of permits, building, zoning, that sort of thing, you want to make sure that they are communicating with you so that they're aware that people do need these floodplain permits and that if they ever get any information or questions about that, those should go to you. And yeah, it's very, very helpful when everybody is on the same page since floodplain can often be overlooked. And remember to always ask for more details if needed. This will also come into play later, but if you're unsure of what the applicant means or where the project's going to be, just keep asking those questions. As the FPA, you are able to request any reasonable information to make your determination. And just a note that in rural communities and counties, especially where there's no zoning, getting people to know that they need a permit is a large challenge. We've had a lot of communities come to us and say that this is something they're struggling with. So the best way to go around that and fix that issue is just making sure that that information about floodplain permits and what a floodplain even is really readily available to your community members so that if they're looking at any sort of permit or development within the county, the information for floodplain development is also right there. Step 2, so the actual floodplain development permit application. So if the proposed development is not in the floodplain, any other local required permits for building will be issued and the person can go on their way. But if the proposed development is in the floodplain, you will provide that property owner with a blank floodplain development permit application form. You may have to walk the applicant through the application, give them a brief explanation of the permit, basic requirements, maybe what is a floodplain, talk to them about elevating and elevation certificates for structures, the less than 1 foot rise or no rise determinations that are needed. The state model permits that we discussed last week also include instructions for how to complete each section of our model. So that can be really helpful to also provide the applicant with. This is also where you will provide the applicant with the base flood elevation, whether if it's in a zone A, if you're requesting that from our office, or if it's in an AE zone where the base flood elevation is determined on the flood insurance study and you as the floodplain administrator have to go in and calculate that. Or if they're doing a large development that is 5 acres or 50 lots, whichever one is lesser, then that applicant must hire an engineer to determine that BFE. But giving that information to the applicant is very important, so they're able to tell what elevation they need to build at, what their options are, really. So at a minimum, if you're not using our state model, the application should include the site location, this nice and specific address, parcel number, lot number, whatever they can give you to give you a good idea, not just, oh, at the corner of this road and this road. That can work, but it's better to have a lot more specific information in case there's any difficulty in telling if it's in the floodplain or not. Contact information for the applicant. There on our model, there's a spot for the project owner versus the applicant. You can have an applicant such as an engineer filling out this application for the project owner, but you just want to make sure you have good contact information for someone that is in charge of this project so you know who to reach if needed. You'll want a good description of the proposed project, indicating the use or occupancy for any structures, since that can change what regulations they need to follow, plans and specifications for proposed construction, and the signature of the applicant, owner, or the authorized agent again, that all the information they provided to you is correct. So like I said, our new state model includes all of this information to make sure that nothing is missing. But if you want to use your own application, you're more than welcome to. We just have this readily available to make it as easy as possible for you guys. And throughout this presentation, we'll be following the format of the new permit, but again, it's still applicable even if you don't use our actual form. So with the permit application, if you're using the model, the applicant must complete sections A, B, and C. Section A, contact information for the applicant, like we talked about, and specific location information for the project site. Oh, and also, we switched a couple slides around after we sent out the slides to all participants. So if you're following along in the PDF form from Michelle, just notice that these slides might appear a little later in that, but information's all the same and it's still applicable in both locations. Section B, full description of the project. They'll check boxes for all included development activities, whether that's both structural, non-structural, all of that information needs to be included on the application. And section C is that applicant certification that everything they provided is correct. So step 3, FPA review of application. So floodplain administrators are required to review all the proposals for compliance with local regulations. This might seem daunting, and you all totally understand that it can be a bit confusing, but you do have a roadmap for compliance. Your local floodplain ordinance explains all the floodplain requirements and breaks them down by both flood zone and development type. So if you are not quite sure what needs to happen, you can always have your ordinance right next to the application and be going through and reading your specific regulations in your adopted ordinance to what needs to be followed on that application. If there can be some glaring problems out there, maybe you just see that it's a human habitation, but it's in the floodway. That should immediately set off little lights in your head and being like, nope, this can't happen. But that's why it's really helpful to have that ordinance, since it states no structure for human habitation within the floodway. And so you can just check that super easily with the application. So you'll check that the form is complete and that the full application packet containing supporting information, such as you'll need a determination of floodwater rise. You'll need any engineer, surveyor, architect certifications, whether that's for elevations or floodproofing requirements, plot plans, any grading plans, and structural specifications blueprints, since also as well, you want to make sure that utilities are being elevated to the correct level or floodproofed. And if you're ever unsure, please give any of us here at the state a call. We are happy to help you with this process. It can seem very overwhelming. That's one of the reasons why we're doing this training, is to try and help you guys, since it can be super confusing. But if you ever have any specific questions, please just give us a call or an email. So step 4, the FPA permit decision. So decide if you have what you need to approve the application. You may approve, deny, or request more information. If denied, you'll want to provide the applicant with information as to why or what's wrong with their proposed plan. If you're requesting more information, provide the document with the list of, yes, provide the applicant with a list of required documents. Tell them what exactly they're needing. That's where you can use the state model request for information, as you can just mark off which things they're missing and then hand them back to them and explain maybe a little bit more in depth about what they're missing and how they go about getting those forms. If you're approving the application, this is where the FPA will need to fill out the section D on our model, or this is also just if you're not using our model, where you'll provide the applicant with the requirements for compliance. We recommend not filling out section D until they submit all the documents they need, and you can answer all of those questions within section D without leaving any blank, but that's just recommended. Since this is just a model, you can go through this process however you'd like. But you will need to know information such as the required flood protection elevation, which is the BFE plus freeboard. How high do they need to build, which is what you calculated earlier. Need to know, are there flood openings in the foundation walls required? Is this project a substantial improvement? Is any compliance required? Required elevations for HVAC, utilities, electrical, and any other information to meet your ordinance requirements. And again, anything reasonable, you as the floodplain administrator have that right to request that from the applicant. As the FPA, though, it is your job to provide the floodplain compliance requirements, such as determining the required floodplain protection elevation, the BFE plus freeboard. And yeah, like I said, section D on the state model permit has all of these requirements laid out. So it's easy for you to just go through and mark which ones are needed for the particular development. So for existing or non-conforming structures, you want to review the application for substantial damage or improvement. And if the project will be a substantial improvement, you'll need to provide the application with this determination and also just explain to them what a substantial improvement means and why this is something they have to do. You'll clearly mark and communicate that compliance with the regulations is required, and this may require them to modify their original plans, which in that case, they'll want to require a new permit application so that all the information that you have on file is correct to what is actually being built. Yeah, that's applicable to both, substantial damage and substantial improvement when a home is damaged or being improved to 50% or more of the current value. If you'd like more information on that, we have recorded classes on that, so we will only touch on it briefly there. Now, step 5, project monitoring. This is after you've approved the permit, everything is looking good. They can begin work then. But note, work must begin within 180 days for the permit to be valid. After 180 days and they haven't started that work, they'll need to go through this process again and resubmit a new permit application. If work does begin within 180 days, the permit is good for the life of the project unless otherwise specified by the community. You in the community, you do have the authority to set limits. If after 3 years they're still working, haven't finished, you can set that cutoff and require them to reapply. So in this 5th step, the project monitoring, you as the FPA are now responsible for monitoring the work and completing inspections. It can be extremely hard and costly to correct issues if you wait until construction is finished. That's why you really want to be on it and watching what they're doing. Since you build a house below BFE, that can be really difficult to raise an entire house up that extra 5 inches or so that they're missing. Much easier to fix if just the foundation has been poured. Also, a tip is aligning your inspection with other building, utility, and electrical inspections. as there's more guidelines set out for when those inspections are happening. So it just makes it easier. Less people are coming into their site, just keeps everything together. So some examples of mid-construction compliance verification may include requesting a mid-construction elevation certificate, such as when the foundation is poured to check elevations of the floor. Since, like I said, it's a lot easier to fix something below BFE if it's just the foundation. But note, this doesn't cover the required post-construction elevation certificate. This is just for your own use to make sure that everything is being followed in the permit. You can also check and photograph grading activities to ensure that they're staying within the bounds of the permit, and checking for other unauthorized work. If they're adding additional structures, if there's unauthorized improvements or additions to existing structures, etc. Just anything that doesn't fall within what was outlined on the permit. If unauthorized work is discovered, communities can issue a stop work order if you have that authority, or hold the floodplain development permit, which all communities have this authority. And if that floodplain development permit is pulled, then they're in violation and should stop work. If this happens, you may contact our office for assistance. We have helped a lot of communities when they run into this situation. It can be very difficult, especially in either small towns or with very big projects that are important to the city, to get those things going. And so it can be difficult if you're the one kind of holding up the process. It can be really awkward and stressful for you, and we understand that. We have sent letters to your community board. If they're not wanting to follow the floodplain regulations that are just backing you up, we can offer you support in that situation so you don't have to shoulder the brunt of all of that pressure. So step 6 is that post-construction proof of compliance. Proof of compliance means any document that verifies compliance with the local ordinance and permit after construction is complete. So post-construction floor elevations for any structure must be obtained and maintained by the community. You can see that that's cited in the Code of Federal Regulations. The elevation certificate from FEMA is recommended form of obtaining this information because it verifies post-construction floor elevations using surveyed elevations. It ensures the permit was followed. The elevation certificate can be a little long and confusing to someone unfamiliar with it, but we have training. It comes with instructions. So that's why it's most recommended. It covers everything that needs to be covered and is an easy way to verify that compliance. For non-structural development, though, post-construction proof will look a little different since you don't have any lowest floors to check the elevation of. Some may include before and after photographs of grading, demonstrating that the ground has been returned to pre-existing conditions. In-person site inspections, verifying that all construction materials and equipment have been removed from the site, and checking for any unauthorized work, making sure they didn't put up a structure or something that you did not okay. Oh, and here is our permitting decision tree. This is a new graphic that we've come up with that will be part of our administrative procedures guide, which be on the lookout for that within the next year. It'll outline everything that has to do with floodplain administration and management. But this permitting decision tree really walks you through the steps of issuing a floodplain development permit and what needs to happen depending on the situation. So it starts with the permit or with the project being proposed to you. So this is where you check, is it in the floodplain or not? No, they don't need a permit. Tree ends there. The yes tells you that they will need the floodplain development permit. And then it asks what kind of development. If it's non-structural, they don't, non-structural developments don't have any elevation or floodproofing requirements, but they still require that base flood elevation determination, maybe a determination of rise, and a complete review. Just because it's non-structural doesn't mean you can just sign off on the permit, is what that's saying. But if it is structural developments do have more regulations that they must follow. So if it's for human habitation, if it's not, non-structural, non-residential structures may have more options for mitigation depending on their use. If it's not, then the elevation must be elevated at least 1 foot above the BFE or dry floodproof below 1 foot above the BFE. And apologies for how this laid out. This graphic is kind of long, so it didn't fit super well on our slide, so it's cut in half here. So if it is a structure for human habitation, you can see on that top left bubble, it tells you that human habitation structures are not allowed within the floodway, but otherwise they need to be elevated at least 1 foot above the BFE or more if your community has that higher standard. And that this can be done using fill, foundation walls, posts, piers, or poles. Sorry, I can't read that super well, but it must be elevated in a allowed way within the Code of Federal Regulations. So if you go back to the non-residential structures, it asks, does the structure qualify as ag or accessory structure? And this is because these structures can have their own separate regulations if your community has adopted those. So an accessory structure can choose to be wet flood proofed if they're below the certain size regulation, and that fits in there in that decision tree asking, does it fit that 800 square foot and does your community adopt that? Then yes, it could be flood proof, wet flood proofed, but no, then the structure must be elevated or dry flood proofed. And the ag structure also follows that same little pipeline. Does your community have that language? Yes, it can be wet flood proofed. But if your community doesn't have that language adopted, then it just must be elevated at least the 1 foot or dry flood proofed. So here's just a simple little things you're looking for in the permit review. You're reviewing for completeness, you're reviewing for compliance, and then you're approving or denying or requesting more information. Completeness, you just want to make sure all the sections are filled out and all the supporting documents are attached. And that with those documents and information that they are complying with your local regulations. You want to verify that all activities will meet your community's ordinance requirements. All engineering documents should be examined by the community's staff engineer or by us here at the Floodplain Division. And once you've done that, you're reviewed for completeness, you're reviewed for compliance, you will make that decision to approve, deny, or requesting more information. You should absolutely not waive requirements due to pressure from the applicant. We understand that it can feel very awkward, especially in tight-knit communities, that there's pressure on you to make this happen and just throw out these regulations out the window. Who cares? It hasn't flooded here in 50 years, but that is not how you do things within the NFIP. Everything must be permitted properly, even if it seems silly. And again, if you're feeling that pressure and you need support, please let us know and we will support you completely. We will move into base flood elevation determinations, which Mercy will present.
Thank you, Isabella. I apologize. I was kicked off Zoom at the beginning, but I'm sure Isabella did introduce me. I'm Mercy, and I'll be taking over this part of the class. I'll be talking about base flood elevation determinations, and I'll also look at resourceful tips. And yeah. So on this next slide here, BFE determinations are done by flood zone. So the process of determining a BFE depends on which flood zone that the site is in. So there are 3 places that the BFE can come from. The first one is the flood insurance rate map, which usually has got AH and AO zone. I'll talk a bit about this on the next slide. And then the second place is us here at the agency or community determinations. If you have that more than that 50 lots of 5 acres site plan, then we are not able to provide a BFE for you. But if it's below that, you are able to request a BFE for basic A zones through our website. Once you go to our website, there's a section that says request for BFE, and then you can do it from there. We have got in-house engineers that will be able to provide that for you. And then the last place is a flood insurance study. This is for AE zones, and I'll talk about this on this next slide. As I mentioned, Zone A, you can request for that information from our office. For Zone AE, you use the flood insurance study, which I will show later on in the class. And then for zone AH and zone AO zones, for zone AO, you're going to go with the depth number on the firm panel. If it doesn't have that number, you need to assume that it's 2 feet. And then the base flood elevation would be that depth number plus the highest adjacent grade. That would make the BFE. And then for AH zone, it will have that base flood elevation as just the elevation on the firm panel. Remember that you need to add that 1 foot freeboard. Nebraska has the minimum standard of 1 foot freeboard. But if your community has adopted a higher standard, then you need to add that elevation onto that depth number. As I mentioned, A zones don't have base flood elevation determined on the firm, and the flood insurance is not available. So, as I mentioned, our agency will be able to provide for those base flood elevations. You may request them at our website with the link that is posted on the slides, or you can email Michelle York, who's with us here in the class, and then she'll be able to reset any password request if you have forgotten your password. This is only for the floodplain administrators. Floodplain administrators are the only people who are able to request for that base flood elevation. So anybody in your community that needs that base flood elevation has to go through you. So I'm going to go through the process of determining a BFE in AE zone using your flood insurance study. So the first thing is that you're going to measure the BFE the nearest 1/10 of a foot. The determination must be reasonable, and flood plain administrators have the authority to make this decision. If you're not sure, you can also call us. We can help you with we cannot help you determining the exact best flood elevation, but we'll be able to walk you through this process that I'm going to go through just to check to make sure that you have the BFE correct. So starting point is to go to our flood insurance rate maps. Oh, yes, on our interactive map. So once you go on our website and you go onto our interactive maps, you'll be able to find the location of the site, or the proposed site. We have a couple of tools there which you can use to pinpoint that specific place once you have the location of the site proposal, and then it will look something like this. You can use either one of our tools there that have different types of location pinpoints. You can ask a contractor or an engineer to provide the site map for you. And if you're making the box of the area, use the highest upstream part to determine the BFE. And then the next part would be identify the cross sections that the proposed site is in. So for this specific example, we were between C and D. And so this will come in handy later when we go to the flood insurance rate maps. This is where you're going to know where to calculate the BFE from that proposed site. So make sure you take note and which side that calculation is going to go through. So for this specific side, it's going to be between D and C. You use these dark lines on the interactive map and not these dotted lines. These dotted lines are usually used for insurance, and so you want to make sure that the cross section you're looking at are the bold black lines. On this next part. And so once you have that site location, you're going to draw a straight line from that site straight to the riverbed, which is also known as the thaw leg. You'll be able to find these tools on our interactive map, and you can also put the measurement either in feet or meters, preferably in feet, because the flood insurance map is in feet. So you want to make sure that you have that metric toggled on. And then once you have that straight line that hits the thaw leg, you're going to measure the distance from that point where your straight line hits the thaw leg to the nearest cross section. So what you're basically doing with this straight line is creating a virtual cross section. And so once that long green line, which is here, hits the thaw leg, and Then you're going to calculate the distance from that point to your nearest cross-section. So for this one, I think you moved from that point to C. I think I can see there. Not very well. Then on that next slide, you're going to open the flood insurance study for the county. In this case, we're looking at the Lancaster counties. So find the flood profile for the correct stream or stream showing the correct cross-section. So for this case, we're looking at the Little Nemaha River, and then we are moving from that side of cross-section to cross-section C. And then on this next slide, so starting at that cross-section, you measure from step 3, which I mentioned. You're going to measure that same distance between the x-axis. So you're going to measure from where that line hit the thaw leg to your nearest cross-section, which for this case was C. So make sure that you remember the cross-section which you measured to, because that's the exact one that you're going to measure in the flood insurance study. The site was between C and D, but we went with C because that's where we measured from that site. So in this case, it was about 450 feet, which you measure on the flood insurance study. Once you hit that line, you're going to draw a straight line, or you're going to measure the distance from that distance that you measured from the cross-section C to hit a line on the flood insurance profile. So we usually call this this line the dot line. This is the 100-year annual chance line shown on the chart. You can also check this out on the legend, which is included in the flood insurance study. So once you measure that line, where it hits the 100% annual chance, that is where your BFE would be on the y-axis. So on that yellow arrow that is showing on the screen, that will be your determined best flood elevation. Remember, you are allowed to interpolate the nearest tenth of a foot. And so for this specific example, it was about 1,238.1 foot. On this next slide. Just to add one other thing from that previous slide, once you determine that best flood elevation, you still need to add the extra 1 foot freeboard. So once you determine the BFE, you'll have to add the 1 foot freeboard if that's what your community has. But if they have a higher standard, then you add that 2 feet or 3 feet or whatever that the community has to get to that elevation. For paper maps, they will not, for those communities that have paper maps, they will not be able to use the interactive map. You are going to go and download your firm panels from the FEMA Map Service Center, and this is how they would look like. So you do the calculations that I've just done from step 1 to 4 using your firm panels. And if you have any issues, you can always contact us and it will help you do the calculations. On this next slide, I'm going to go through the helpful tips and resources. So always ensure that community members are aware of permitting requirements before beginning a development. This is very important to save you a lot of heartache and headaches, because if there's somebody in your community that has done a project and they didn't even know anything about floodplain, they didn't know about elevation and all that stuff, and they complete their project and then you come in and say, oops, this is what you need to do, they're not going to be very happy with you. So regular community outreach is very important. You can do this by sending out emails, you can send postcards, you can send out brochures, you can do classes that you can teach to your community and make sure that they understand what a floodplain is, what the NFIP is, and all this information, so that when they even think about doing a new construction, they know exactly where they need to go for any help. Next slide. We have most of these resources on our digital desk reference. Our digital desk reference on our website is like a virtual library where you can just go and find out all sorts of information. Sometimes we even have templates for brochures. We have all sorts of information on that digital desk reference. So if you are able to go there and get some of the information that will help you to get this information to your community, that will be really helpful. We also have links to the model permit application, which Isabella just taught about, which you can get from the digital desk reference as well. We also still have the old model permit, which you can also access at that digital desk reference. And then you can also get the trainings like the one that we're doing today. Once we're done with this class, we'll be able to edit it and post it on our YouTube page. And so you are able to access some of these trainings in case you need a refresher or something comes up and you don't really remember. You can go back to these classes such as this one. Our last class that we did last week, we have it already up on our website, so you can watch that as well in case you missed it, and then come back to this one. The next slide here. So I'm going to go through the key takeaways. Floodplain development permits are required for the development in the special flood hazard area. Any type of development needs to be permitted. Some of the developments, you may not be able to catch them. Of course, you're not always going out there checking, seeing who's doing what. But for the most part, all the developments will need to be permitted. The state model permit application is to assist, but it is not required. Communities are allowed to modify their permits to whatever they're able to use or whatever they want it to look like, as long as it goes through their local ordinance regulations. You need to review applications for completeness and correctness, as Isabella mentioned before you decide to approve or deny. If you're not sure or if you need any information needed, please send that application back to the property owner or the applicant so that they can give you the information that you need. We're also happy to review materials if you're unsure of an application. We are not able to tell you to approve or deny a permit, but we can help you, or we can guide you in that decision, making sure that we can review some of the materials. Sometimes people get permits and that's the first permit you've seen since you've been a floodplain administrator and you really don't know how to go about anything. We're always able to help you with that and help you review and counter check some of the regulations that you need to make sure that are in that permit. You can also inform community members what is the permitting process. So engage with your community, talk to them mostly about what the floodplain is, what the permitting process is. You can also do classes with your board. If you have a village board that meets regularly, you have that opportunity to let your board members know about the permitting process, and hopefully they can also take that information to their community members. We do have upcoming trainings. On Wednesday, October 22nd, we'll have the Floodplain Administrator. Now what? This is going to be like a basic-ish training on what to do as a Floodplain Administrator, what are your duties, what are your roles, how to go about things. So that's going to be an interesting one. It's going to be from 6 to 8 p.m. It's an after-hours class. So we usually do the after-hours class for those that are not able to meet during the day and have other jobs that they need to attend to. So this will be an after-hours class. Make sure you look out for that. We also have one on November 18th, which will be higher floodplain standards. So this is going to be going beyond the minimums to protect your community. So as I mentioned, Nebraska has got minimum standards, but why is it important, or why would it benefit your community to go to beyond those minimums? So that's what that class is going to be about. And then we have our basic floodplain management class, December 11th. This is a full class that talks about from permitting to regulations and everything in between. So this is a very good class for those that need a refresher or those that just started as floodplain administrators. It will be from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. and you can register this at our website on the link that just is on the slides. Next. And finally, please do follow us on social media. We have a Facebook page, an Instagram, LinkedIn, and X account. So this is where we usually post some of the announcements for classes and some information regarding floodplain management. Some of those that you may be able to reshare for your community. I know these days Facebook is disperses information much faster. So that may be a tool that you may be able to use to get information to your community members. We have merged now, so it may be difficult to find some of our information, but we're still there posting, so you'll be able to find those there. And then lastly, this ends our class for today. These are all our contacts, as I mentioned, if you need to ask us any more questions. These are our phone numbers and emails on the outreach team.